absence of suffering. It's learning to live in a different relationship with it. Peace is not the absence of war. It's acknowledging that the roots of war that exist in me can become transformed through my not acting on them. But if I don't acknowledge the roots of war that exist in me, if I look at the source of suffering as external, then of course what I'm going to do is just continue to repeat those cycles. I want the world to be different. If I want the world to be different, I have to be the difference that I want to see in the world. It's not about changing the world. It's about putting myself in a position where transformation can take place. That means that I have to be willing to step right into the midst or into the heart of my suffering. If I'm not willing to do that, healing and transformation, it will forever evade me. Healing is not what I call healing. Healing is simply what it is, which is discovered through the experience of it, and I cannot experience it if I have preconceived ideas about what it is. The point of spiritual practice, and there is no healing without spiritual practice. Without spiritual practice, it's impossible to have the container to hold all of this as it manifests itself. Now, at the conclusion of this retreat, I remember I walked in, I sat down, and the Vietnamese monk came, and he was traveling with one assistant at the time. And he came in and sat down, and I looked up and I saw he was Vietnamese, and I burst into tears. Because I realized at that point that I still saw the Vietnamese as the enemy. Even though I had been telling myself it wasn't true. I was okay with all of this now. I still saw this guy as the enemy. He was the face of the enemy. Which means that I had in that instant stripped him of his humanity. Which meant that I was still divorced from my own humanity. This moment I create, the moment I see the world as self and other, healing and transformation are impossible. There is no self and other. I don't have any enemies that I'm aware of at this moment. 5 minutes, man, but right now, not. It's true that I am not you, but I am not other than you. It's a larger truth. At the conclusion of that retreat, I was invited to come to their meditation center, which was in France. Impossible for me because I was unemployable. I didn't have any money. And, of course, that was always a great excuse for me. Oh, I'd really like to, but, I don't have any money. I can't do this. And interesting, the assistant to this monk said to me, if you just agree to come, see what happens. And I said, okay, I'll come. And at the moment, I had this exhilarating sense of relief or release, which about an hour and a half later were filled with the most incredible thoughts. Because you see, what my mind was telling me, this is also a really critical piece. What my mind was telling me was that the only reason these people were really inviting me was that when I got there, to their place in France, they were going to imprison me, put me on trial for war crimes, and then they were either going to put me in prison for the rest of my life, or they were going to kill me. That's what my mind was telling me. Out of this offer of this gesture of kindness, that's what my mind did with that gesture of kindness. Kindness was something that was unknowable to me. I mean, I could act in a kind way, but there wasn't anything behind it. It was just an idea of kindness. And remember, the idea of kindness is not kindness. Kindness is something that grows out of a disciplined spiritual practice. It grows out of the process of healing and transformation. It cannot be thought or created. That which we call kindness and act out in kindness is only repeating cycles of violence and suffering. I have nothing to teach anyone. I have nothing to give people that will heal them. All I can do is show them the map that was given that I have discovered along this path, point in a direction, provide some tools, and the rest is up to the person. The rest is up to the individual. As a result of my agreeing, however, I started to get, people started to send me letters with donations, money. And pretty soon I had enough for a ticket. Well, at that point I had a choice. You know, am I going to like really go to this monastery, or like, you know, am I going to, I don't know, jump on my motorcycle and drive real far? But I bought the ticket and I went. I bought a return ticket with the idea of staying 4 to 6 weeks and coming back. I stayed for 3 years. And it just kept unfolding for me. I just allowed myself to be available to whatever was happening in that moment. Towards the end of my stay there, they had a retreat at this monastery for helping professionals. And the abbot of the monastery, whom I met, who facilitated that retreat I was at, came up to me and he said, "You're going to talk to this group." He didn't ask me if I wanted to. He said, "You will talk to this group." You can't say, I mean, I could have said no, but you can't really say no when the abbot comes up and says, "You're going to do this." So I said to him, I said, "Okay, I'll do it if you're there. You got to be there though, or I'm not going to do it." He said, "I'll be there," and he was. Sat right down front. And it was the first time in my life I ever publicly spoke about the truth of my experience as I knew it at that time. And it's as a result of that my life began to unfold in another way. And I started to have more interactions with the topic of violence and war and the trauma associated with that. It didn't immediately surface in my own community of soldiers here in the U.S. Where it started to surface for me first was abroad. I started to get invited to Germany. And I started working with this topic in Germany. And then in Germany, what happened is that I started to do retreats in the sites of former concentration camps. I was ordained, by the way, in a Nazi death camp, Auschwitz. And then I walked from Auschwitz to Vietnam. In robes, without money, begging for everything. But I would do retreats in these concentration camp sites. And it was there that I was learning more and more about my own history. It was discovering the reality of what happened in Europe during this period of time. Not just Germany, but in Europe. Because I did this in Germany, I did it in the Netherlands, I did it in Belgium, I did it in Poland, I did it in Spain and in Italy. But it was becoming more intimate with the topic of the roots of war in me. The seeds of violence in me. So that I could become more conscious. I mean, that is the point of spiritual practice. It's about waking up to the wholeness of my existence, which is not just one thing or the next. As I was continuing to go through this process, which was just engaging in this practice, I got invited to do a meditation retreat with veterans, with former soldiers. It was happening in Oregon. I did that retreat for 12 years. Every year for 12 years. I did a retreat in Oregon with veterans. And then, so as somehow the word started to spread that that there was this soldier monk who did this, who offered this practice, and that it was somehow supportive and helpful to people. I was invited 5 or 6 years ago back to the Omega Institute, which is where I went to that first retreat, to facilitate a meditation retreat for that. The first retreat I facilitated there were 12 people who came. 11 men, 1 woman, and 10 stayed. I will be doing a retreat there this year, and from what I understand, there are already registered 120. The word is out. The only, okay, I'll say it. The only effective tool for working with the consequences of war, violence, and suffering is a disciplined spiritual practice. Now, that a disciplined spiritual practice has a lot of different components to it. But it is a disciplined spiritual practice rooted in self-reflection. Doesn't matter what I think, believe, or say, but rather what I do. The first thing I say to these men and women when they come, and really there are people coming who served in the Second War, in the Korean War. There are people who served in the Dominican Republic in the 60s. There are people who were in Somalia. There were people who were in the hotel in Lebanon when it was blown up. There are people who served in Bosnia. There are people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, both incursions into Iraq. There's a full range. Central America, there's a full range of people coming. And the first thing that I say to them is that if you came here looking to be healed, you're in the wrong place. And that's not what happens here. The second thing I tell them, if you came here looking for a spa experience, you better go home. Because this spiritual practice is really hard work. I mean, it's demanding. It's demanding, excruciatingly sometimes, excruciatingly painful work. To wake up to the real cost of war, violence, and suffering. But as a result of that, I've put together some information. Check this out. Combat restricts and arrests the personal exercise of will as absolutely as the harshest imprisonment. A key survival skill in both circumstances is suppression of the will, which goes hand in hand with suppression of thoughts of the future. A depleted state of apathy and inability to want anything, to will anything, often persists into life after combat, when it is no longer needed as a survival skill. We want the world to be different. It can be, if we're willing to live differently. And we cannot think ourselves into a new way of living. We must live ourselves into a new way of thinking. We have to be very cautious not to protect the arguments of the power holders. We do not set ourselves up for trauma. We do not ask for it any more than an 8-year-old girl or boy asks for it when he or she is raped by a relative. The insistence with which such reflexive equations as set himself up for it and ask for it push forward an explanation for trauma is a reflection of how frightening and painful it is to believe accounts of high-stakes betrayal of what's right. We want the world to be different. It can be if we are willing to live differently. What are you willing to do, and how can I help? That's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do. I don't have any answers. There isn't any magic. But I can point in the direction. But we have to be willing to let go of all of our ideas of how we think life is supposed to be. We have to allow life to be deconstructed. And another really important thing to remember is that it's critical to understand that when combat trauma results in domestic violence and pathological family life, I grew up in that, there is an intergenerational transmission of trauma. You know, this is something I worked with a lot in Europe. The transgenerational effects of war, violence, and suffering. And this is all core to Buddhist teaching. That's why when I heard this monk talk, it's like I knew the truth of what he was saying. I'd known it since I was a child. It made sense. And he wasn't trying to sell me anything. He wasn't trying to convert me. He wasn't trying to do anything like that. He said to us, and I say this to others, that we are the light at the tip of the candle. We burn hot and bright. We have the possibility to transform this suffering and to therefore bring an end to war, violence, and suffering in the world. Because we and the world are not two things. Want the world to be different? Can be. If I let go of all of my ideas about it, and if I'm willing to just sit down and turn that light inward. A disciplined spiritual practice rooted in self-reflection. And then, I'm not talking about hiding in my room. Once adopting this disciplined spiritual practice is then allowing that to manifest itself in everything that I do all of the time. Washing the dishes is a spiritual practice. Making the bed is a spiritual practice. Hanging up my clothes is a spiritual practice. This Zen thing works for me really well because it's very regimented. But the regimentation of things provide me a container where, when that suffering is really exposing itself, when I'm most affected by it, one, I don't have to deny it, and two, there's a container which supports me. When there was the first incursion in Iraq, I knew it was coming before it happened. You could see the culture gearing up for it. You could tell by the films that were being made. You could tell by the rhetoric that was happening, the kind of songs that were being sung. You could tell that they were gearing up for war again. I could feel it. I mean, because I have this taste, and because I'm not afraid, I don't have to reject it, because I can't stop it. I'm willing to experience the powerlessness and the sadness and the anger and the fear of it all. I could see it coming. But I tell you, it was so painful for me that I didn't know what to do with all of that. And I just wanted it to stop. And the only way I knew how to stop it, what my mind was telling me the only way to stop it was to die. That was it. That's the only thing my mind could come up with. But what I did, rather than that, was I called up the person whom I'm ordained by. I talked candidly with the people in the community of like-minded people who support me. I talked with a few of these people, and they said, "AnShin, buddy, that might not be the best solution. Why don't you just keep doing what you do?" And I said, "Well, what's that?" They said, well, just keep sitting. Sit just to sit. And of course, I was frustrated and angry because I wanted to do something, and it just seemed like nothing. It was a waste of time. But I just kept doing what they suggested. I just kept sitting. I sat every morning. I sat every night. I did the recitations that are accompanied with my sittings in the morning and at noon. And one day I picked up a shovel and a pickaxe, and I started digging a trench from the house that belongs to the meditation center that hosts me back to a building that was a 2-car carport and a workshop. And from that first act of start digging this trench, within a month and a half, I had converted that building into a meditation hall. Independently functioning. And I remember I did the first sitting in there before the floor was even in, and the place was packed. It was really interesting. I can remember walking out of that meditation hall and the thought. It was one of those turning thoughts. That's a Buddhist expression. It's a turning thought. It's this awareness that breaks through my attachments to worldly ideas and things. It just sort of falls through that. And there's this clear understanding. I went, oh, that's what I was supposed to do. It was just clear for me. Because people were so needing some place where they could feel safe, where they could learn how to hold and process what was going on for them. In 2000, I was approached about the book that I've had the privilege to have published, Hell's Gate. I was approached first. I've been approached several times about publishing a book, and people say, oh, man, have you ever written a book? And I went, yeah, I got some stuff. They said, well, send us some stuff. This ought to be published. So I remember I sent it to a publishing company, and the person wrote back and said, it's very interesting, but you don't know how to write. I said, well, okay. They said, maybe in another 10 years, if you worked at it really good, you would get it in some kind of shape, it might be publishable. And I sent it to someone else. A few years later, someone else approached me, and I sent them some stuff, and they said the same thing. So I just said, I'm done. Forget about it. I'm done with this. Then a guy approached me and said, this is what I do. Let me help you get this. Have you ever thought about publishing a book? And I said, no, I never. And besides, I said, some people have asked, and I sent it in. They say I can't write. He said, your stuff needs to be out there. Let me help you. So I said, okay. What do I have to lose, So I worked with him a bit. And he submitted the manuscript, and I had 2 offers. The book got published, and it's been published in several languages. One language was Italian. And when I met with the publisher of the Italian language version, I said, well, how come you decided to publish this book? And the publisher said, because it's so well written. I go, I was anxious. I was nervous to allow the book to be published because the community that some of us are a part of, this community of veterans, is a very fractious and contentious community, and they don't like their ideas of what their experience was like to be shaken at all. They are willing to do anything to protect their ideas of what they believe happened, whether it was true or not. To protect the myth of war, they're willing to destroy you and kill you. It happens all the time. And I didn't know that I was really ready to have any of that go down. But I just agreed. I said, okay, let's do it. Because I kept telling myself, I'm not really a writer, I'm a monk. So we'll just do this as a practice. And it was true. Out of the blue, I was in Detroit doing something in support of the book, and out of the blue I get an email from someone who I'd served with in Vietnam. I didn't remember this guy at all, but he remembered me. And he said this other guy was about to go viral on the internet, disparaging the things that I'd written in the book, claiming that I didn't serve in the unit that I served in. I served with the 116th Assault Helicopter Company, 259th Aviation Battalion, 1st Aviation Brigade. And he was, and interesting enough, he gave me the guy's name. Now, this is how, when I say be careful what you think, this is how the mind works and how memory works. There was a particular event where, for some reason, I didn't fly that day, and I don't know why. Because I was hooked. I was hooked on the adrenaline of combat. But I didn't fly that day. Then the word came down in the unit that the unit had they'd come under heavy fire and they'd taken heavy casualties, and they were bringing a lot of guys into the 12th Evacuation Hospital, which was the evac hospital at the base where we were headquartered at the time. And I remember running down to the 12th Evac Hospital. I remember helping carry in the wounded, and one of the helicopters came in, and there was a guy in the helicopter, he'd get shot in the face. A bullet went in one cheek and out the other. But his mouth had just been opened a bit, so it didn't really do any much damage. Broke some teeth. He didn't get hurt too bad, but still, I mean, shot in the face. I remember carrying him in, sitting with him, and cleaning the teeth fragments out of his mouth, cleaning the blood out of his mouth so that he could breathe. I don't have to worry about swallowing that stuff. It was the guy who was ready to claim that I didn't serve in the unit. Same guy. Be careful what you think. All systems of thought are only guiding means. They're not absolute facts. Not even Buddhist ones. Memory is what it is. It's not an absolute fact. We can reconstruct things as best as we can. But you take 6 people and have them experience one event, and they're all going to experience it from different angles of perception. The truth is not a fixed, solid thing. It's fluid in this sense. We have to be cautious about that. On the 17th of April, I facilitate another Veterans Retreat at the Omega Institute. There's information out here about it. If you want to come, and if they tell you it's full, my email address is in the back of the book. You can write to me, and I will make sure that you have a place if you want to come. The truth of war, violence, and suffering is that the reality of it and how we've been affected by it never goes away. So what is your war? We've all had them. We all have our experiences. So don't compare your experience to mine. Look into yours. 100% of people who join the military are traumatized. That's the nature of the training. Not 30% who experience combat, but 100% who are trained. And if you're a female veteran, I can't even begin to understand what it must have been like for you. Because military culture by nature is misogynistic. Objectifying women. Abusing and exploiting them. That has to change. But it's not going to change unless we're willing to tell the truth. Not the truth that we want to tell, but the truth of our experiences. Not massage it, not shape it, not manipulate it, but just tell it. As it was, just tell it. And I've met a number of females who served in the military, and I said, well, how was your service? And they almost always go, oh, it was okay, man. It was great. I said, really? They treated you okay? Oh, yeah, everything was good. I just go, okay. I'm not going to argue with them. That's their perspective at the time. But it's just like, understanding that in this society and culture, in general, women are objectified. All you have to do is look at the advertisements on television, the billboards on the street, or the ads in the magazine. There is no possibility for healing and transformation to take place if I hold on to the myth that everything is okay. My father was a soldier in the Second War, grandfather in the First, great-grandfather in the War of Spain. I was a soldier in Vietnam. Transgenerational things. I have a son. I haven't always been a monk. My son is 40 years old, wears a uniform. Transgenerational thing. He's not in the military, he's not a firefighter, he's not a police officer. This is a riddle. He's a commercial airline pilot. So he's still got the uniform thing going on. But you see how the process of healing and transformation begins to take place. I abandoned my son when he was 3 years old. Walked away from he and his mother. Didn't see him for 5 years. Had limited contact with him. I know he suffered. I know he suffered when we came back in contact because of the nature of who I was. I carried a gun everywhere. I didn't feel safe without one. I was living in Concord, Massachusetts. I was walking down by the North Station. That's where Boston Garden's at. I was crossing the street in a crosswalk. A van went by and didn't stop. And I remember I just smacked that van. And then I was walking down the street with my son. He was 10 at the time. And somebody ran up behind me and hit me in the back of the head. And I remember I staggered forward, reached in behind, pulled that handgun out, pulled around, and put that handgun in that guy's face. With my 10-year-old son standing. I told that guy, if he didn't turn around and walk away, right that minute, I was going to kill him. And I would have. You know, becoming ordained, I didn't become ordained to get good. I didn't become ordained to then, I don't wear robes to present an aura of holiness, whatever that means. The idea of holiness. And I tell you, that's such a trap that people fall into. That because they're in these kinds of positions, they have to act in certain ways. I mean, I have taken vows, I've taken vows and made commitments, and I really live by them. Because they are very supportive to me. But I'm very cautious not to get trapped in the persona of how I think I'm supposed to act because I wear robes. It's a real danger. Because we're veterans, because we're teachers, because we're this, because we're that. Be careful we don't fall into the trap of the persona that we think we're supposed to be in these positions. But I've talked enough to you. Now I want to stop talking to you and open it up for your questions. Now, this is a point that's the most interesting for me. You can, in this moment, ask me any question you want, providing it's a question. not a statement. Short and to the point. I say it at every session. This is not an opportunity for you to give a co-lecture, and I do not want to argue or debate with you. If you disagree with anything I said, you're entitled to your position, but if you have to attempt to convince me of the rightness of your position and the wrongness of my position, I am not going to argue with you. That's already war. I just have to tell you, you're not very sound in your position, or you wouldn't have to try and convince me. I'm okay with where I'm at and with what I've experienced, because I know that it's constantly opening and unfolding. So, question?
Can you talk a little bit about how mindful meditation can go hand in hand with whatever one's faith is? You don't have to become a Buddhist or how it might see you from one's faith.
Yep. I'm going to read something here. It's interesting. I don't usually do this, but now I'm going to go back into Chinese history, the Buddhist practice in Chinese history. The Tang Dynasty was like in the 600s, I think. Over the Tang Dynasty, Buddhism, and Zen Buddhism in particular, grew to the point where there could have been no class of people or general geographical region untouched by its influence in the China of the Sung Dynasty. The problem was, as predicted in Buddhist scripture, that the very success of the work would eventually attract the wrong kind of people, or rather, that too many people would come with the wrong aspiration. There is a psychological practice that has been developed called family constellations. The founder is a man named Bert Hellinger. Bert's Austrian or German? Yeah, he's a German psychologist. But what happened is it suddenly became very, very popular and in vogue. So people would do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and call it family constellations, and hang out a shingle and start to offer themselves as healers, and it creates a lot of problems. And we've reached a place where the same sort of thing is happening with the word mindfulness. People wrap a thing up with the word mindfulness or mindfulness meditation. And it's starting to become abused and exploited. Mindfulness meditation grows out of Buddhist practice, which are rooted in the 5 founding precepts. The first precept is don't kill. Don't let others kill, and don't condone any act of killing in the world or in our lives. The second precept, don't steal. Third precept, don't take intoxicants. Fourth precept, practice chaste conduct. In the fifth precept, don't lie. They're shaped somehow like that. I might have them confused. That's basically what they are. Without a real understanding of essential Buddhist teaching, I think that the whole notion of mindfulness can become dangerous. To understand the roots from which it came. Now, understanding the roots from which it came doesn't mean that one has to be Buddhist to practice these things. And as I've said throughout the encounters with people that I've had while I've been here, and the world, there's already too many Buddhists in the world. We don't need more. We need more Buddhas. We need people who are willing to wake up. That being said, it's incumbent upon us, if we engage in these practices, to not abandon those essential teachings because they inform the process. Sitting on a cushion is not stress reduction. Sitting on a cushion is like sitting on a bomb. Because when we turn that light of reflection back on ourselves. We start to take away all of the ways in which we have deflected from that which we call uncomfortable or not wanted. We start all the constructs that we have to keep us in a place that we call safe. With that, turning that light inward begins to break those defense mechanisms down, which they are intended to do, because there is no healing and transformation until I am willing, until I come face to face with the roots of war in me, the reality of my suffering. You can't go around it, you can't go over it, you can't go under it. You can't smile your way through it. Mindfulness meditation is a critical aspect to this healing and transformation, but we have to be cautious about where we're getting it, what are the foundations of the people offering it, and what sort of background do they have? How well educated are they in these essential teachings? How much training do they have? Now, I don't really think it's possible to do a 6-week course or 2-year course in mindfulness meditation and all of a sudden get a certificate, say I can do this, because it's a continuous developing process. There is one of the things that I did learn is that I've learned about recently, and for me personally it's painful, that they take the notion of mindfulness meditation and they introduce it to combat soldiers as a way to give them tools so that they're less affected when they go into combat. That's not the point. And that goes right to the heart of what I read about the evolution. Just because practice is so effective in supporting healing and transformation, in awakening, that it suddenly starts to become co-opted. It's a natural consequence. Don't be confused about this. It's not the point. Ask me.
Last night you said you called yourself a murderer.
Uh-huh.
Right. So my question is, when a soldier kills someone in combat, I mean, there's a whole interaction of responsibility. The person that sent him there, the person that manufactured the gun, and all that. So where is the responsibility? With
me, I pulled the trigger. For my actions, I'm responsible. But see, when we get this is the power of the mind. And this is where we have to be cautious, and this is why spiritual practice becomes so important. Is that with the mind, I can shape the world to look like anything I want it to look like. And believe that to be the truth. Convince myself. I mean, it will eventually break down. I have a young man that has befriended me. He lost his foot in Iraq. He recently went back to visit some of his mom's family in Louisiana, in South Louisiana. And Elliot's grandfather served in the Second War. Elliot's grandfather talked about his experiences in the Second War for the first time with Elliot just about 2 weeks ago. He's been carrying this around all of his life. It's influenced everything that he's done and all the people he interacts with, but he always kept it to himself, thinking that he was protecting himself and others from the reality of his experiences. That's the veil of themis that the mind creates to give us the illusion that to rationalize and justify what we did. I often go into prisons, and I often go into maximum security prisons. The first time I went in it was not easy for me. Not because of not because of the population, but because I thought that when they closed that door, they were going to find out some of the stuff that they weren't going to let me out. That was the fear. That was what my mind was creating. Two people. One person that I've given precepts to. His name is Marco Montes. I use his name because he's given me permission to do it. Marco is on death row in Oregon State Penitentiary. And when I gave precepts to Marco, they had him in a little cage in the hall as they took him out of his cell. Marco killed a person. And for that, he's sitting on death row. And what he did wasn't any different than what I've done. Regardless of the circumstances. This is the power of the mind, because we can rationalize and justify. We use circumstances to rationalize and justify our actions. We say, well, this really wasn't killing. It was justified killing. Killing is killing. We have to stop splitting hairs. It's funny, huh? We have to stop splitting hairs around this. And for me, I don't have any problem with it. It's just true for me. I know it. That was one of the most difficult things for me visiting the men that I visit with on death row. Because I've been responsible for more killing than they have. Now, what to do about that? It's not clear. It does become informed through a disciplined spiritual practice. Question? Yes, please.
When your son was 10 and you began on the man, where were you in having become ordained yet? Or have you been ordained already?
Oh, no. That was, so I'm 65, my son's 40. So I was 35 years old. I wasn't ordained until I was into my 40s. So no. I wasn't anywhere near practice yet. Exactly. Now, my gun was gone long before I went to that first retreat. Yeah. Yes, please.
How did you stop drinking or using intoxicants? How did that happen? That was before mindfulness, right?
Yeah, well, for me, I went into a drug and alcohol rehabilitation clinic in 1983. And this was also before I was ordained, before I knew anything about any of this. I went into a rehabilitation clinic, and because it's a fancy name for a psych ward. It's just a dressed-up psychiatric hospital. But I went into this rehabilitation clinic, and there it was a secure environment, and there I got stopped, and I had time away, so I had a pattern established to stop. And then they gave me some recommendations, some tools and things to follow, and I followed their instructions. So by the time I came to Buddhist practice, it had already been over 7 years since I'd taken any intoxicants of any kind. So when I came up to that precept, I went, yeah, well, sure, I know that. Makes sense to me. So it wasn't difficulty for me. I had already stopped eating meat, fish, and poultry probably 10 years before I came to practice. And because I wanted to stop supporting the institutions of killing. So when I heard these things, they were things that I was already living in. Buddhist practice gave me a container to make sense of what the things I was already doing. Yeah. Question? Yes, please.
When you call yourself a murderer, what could you have done? For me, it seems like, in a way, you're blaming, in a way, yourself. But what do you think now could have done in that position?
It does me little good. First, I will say, blaming not. Taking responsibility, I am. And to reflect what could I have done differently is a moot point right now. That was like that. And there's not a thing that I can change about that. And because that was like that, this is like this. So it is as a result of all those experiences that my life hasn't, that I have the opportunities to do what I'm doing now. So there isn't one thing I could change. I don't know if, yeah, I used to wish a lot, but that just drove me deeper into not good places. Because there's not one thing that I can change, not one, about the past. All I can do is change the way it manifests itself right now, in this moment. I can stop doing the things that keep those cycles of war, violence, and suffering alive. Where are you from?
From Romania.
Yes. Please.
I'm not sure your interaction with people in prisons, but have you ever come across someone that you felt was inherently evil, and how do you deal with that? How do you fit that into?
Somebody who is what?
Inherently.
Inherently
And
evil.
how do you fit that into your mindful thinking?
I actually, such a person does not really exist. There are no inherently evil people. All of us possess all qualities, all capacities. If we don't know that about ourselves, we're in trouble. Now, I do know that there are people, and I've spent time with such people, who because of their life experiences or because of certain abnormalities of the brain are limited in the kinds of choices that they can make, and are more or less compelled to act in ways that are not helpful to them or to the society as a whole. That these people aren't inherently evil. They do things that are destructive to others and themselves. But the point is, if I view them as inherently evil, then I do them a disservice. The question that I have to ask is, I know what I've done. I know what I'm capable of. Well, I know what I've done. I don't know what I'm capable of. I know what I've done. And when I'm willing to look at that face to face, at not rejecting or attaching. So I'm not blaming, but I'm also not rejecting. I'm just attempting to be as present as I can with these realities. Then when I meet people like this, their actions make sense to me. Really, I get it. So then the challenge comes for me, how can I support them based on the reality of who they are in the most humane way possible to live a life that's not punitive. And there isn't a clear answer to that. That's why a disciplined spiritual practice is so important, because it's rooted in a disciplined practice that allows me to be present in the moment, and it's in the moment that answers are revealed. It's when I'm willing to step into, or when I'm willing to just rest in the reality of not knowing. I just don't know. It's in the space of not knowing that all things can become known. What to do next can be revealed if I'm willing to just be present with that. So yes, I won't argue with people. I know there's people who believe in this whole topic of inherently evil. I don't. Because I've also been called inherently evil. And I know that I'm not. But it's because people viewed me in that way that prevented me from being able to acknowledge the truth of what I've done. Because I knew I wasn't evil, But what I had done was. Question. Please.
Hi. I know a little bit about always sitting in the front here and exit. I also saw you last night, and I didn't formulate this question. You talked a little bit about tonight, but explicitly last night you said that when you first went away to the monastery, you didn't quite know what you're doing. Then later on, you talked about how, for this process, it's important to have a burning desire, I believe, to let go of all that is untruth. So my question is specifically about intention. What do you understand intention to be? How do I know that my intentions are for enlightenment and not, as you say, to wear the robes and be associated with this? And how do I know what my motivations are?
Well, if I'm being first you have to deal with this topic of how do I know? Knowing is not an intellectual process. So the knowing that is achievable through a disciplined spiritual practice is a knowing beyond intellect, where I'm not rejecting the truth of who I am, nor am I over-identified by that. It just is part of who I am. And it informs my practice. It's an essential piece of it. So, if I need to, as I cultivate this desire to wake up, I have to also at the same time let go of any idea what that means. Now that means along the way I'm going to have a lot of ideas what it means. But as soon as I find myself, excuse me, as soon as I find myself attaching to one of those ideas about what enlightenment means, I have to let it go. I have to stop chasing after that and just stay focused on the pure discipline of sitting and walking and bowing and eating. Just to focus on that, keeping in mind that discipline is also not practice. So it's not something we can think ourselves into. I have to be willing to constantly just drop away. When I become conscious of my attachments and thoughts, to just stop them, drop them away. That doesn't mean they're gone, but it means my relationship to them begins to change. So how do you know? First you have to want to know. You have to want to know that you have the desire. You have to want to know that you're on the right path. You have to have a community of like-minded people who we can associate with, not dogmatically link together. And that community needs to be supported by an authentic teacher. Not someone who has ideas about it. Not someone who's been to a retreat or two and read some books and said, okay, now I'm going to have a group. But someone who's really disciplined. And it can't be about attracting large numbers of folks. It has to be about offering a practice which is authentic, not compromising in any way, but being clear. This is, if you want what I have, you do what I do. It's not about me making it easier for you so that you can continue to come. Practice isn't for those who want it, or isn't for those who need it. It's for those who want it. So I must be solid and stable, and that stability develops over time. Time and commitment. Because I'm challenged again and again and again. Oh, I don't need to do that now. That's okay. No, I'm good. I don't need to read these books. I don't need to do this study period. I really got this taste for a Big Mac. Yeah, just one. To just not surrender myself into that. And through that process, you'll know. The environment around will tell you. You'll know. You're welcome. Yes, please, in the back.
What issues keep you up at night?
I can't hear you.
What issues keep you up at night?
What issues keep me up at night? Well, one of the things that keeps me up at night is my disturbed sleep pattern. and that's not necessarily doesn't necessarily attach it to a particular issue. It can just be. Sometimes I just get anxious. Sometimes I can get very anxious, short of breath. I can hardly stand to be in my skin. Now, the tendency is to attach those feelings to and the thoughts that might accompany that anxiety to something. Say, to start looking, well, how come I'm anxious? Or I'm anxious because of this. It may be true and it may not be true. For me, it's just about recognizing that there are times when I feel more anxious than others. There are times, it's very curious to me. There are some nights when I'm very tired. I get very tired, and I'm ready to go to bed. I go into the bedroom, I take off my clothes, I crawl into bed, and the moment I crawl into bed, bang, I'm wide awake. Can't sleep. I'm just not sleepy anymore. So what I make an effort to do is while I'm there, is I practice sleeping meditation. No, I'm serious. This is not a joke. This is for real. I just make an effort as I'm laying in bed to just stay connected with my breath and just chill. That's a Buddhist term from the 8th century. Chill. I just make an effort to relax as best I can. But what also happens is that if I'm really unable to relax, I don't fuss with myself anymore. I get up, I get dressed, then I find something to do that is in some way supportive to me. I might write emails because I have a lot of correspondence to keep up with. I might write emails. I might not have the concentration to do that. Then I might, I might watch a Star Trek episode on Netflix. Or I might not have the concentration to do that. I might play solitaire. I might not have the concentration to do that. But all of these I do as an act of meditation, not an act of distraction, but somehow to help me stay present with what's happening with me in that moment. And at the same time, not lay there, not allowing my wild mind to start grasping at all kinds of things that it can grasp because it can get pretty crazy. So there are any number of things that I do. Now, there's some times when my mind really does, where a certain event will trigger tension, anxiety, or I'll start obsessing about something. But it's really clear that starts before I get into the night. And when that's happening, I always go, okay, so what can I do about this? And then I either do something or I don't do something. I just have to be really present and not attempt to distract myself from what's happening in that moment, but to be as fully present as I can. Any other questions? Yes, please.
You spoke about learning evidence.
I did.
Can you describe or discuss any differences, gender differences during retreats or gender differences?
What about gender?
Like during retreats, you said that the first one you had one female veteran. Was there any difference in practice or?
None, zero.
Is it just individual?
I make an effort not to discriminate in terms of what I offer. I make an effort not to discriminate in what's available to people. Now, the issues that you as a female veteran would be confronted with may be different from the issues that I'm confronted with. What I make an effort to do is, while acknowledging those differences, at the same time not foster separation by focusing too separately on those issues. Say, I understand, but this is what I have to offer. These tools. And that if you take these tools they can support you in working with whatever the issues are that you're confronted with. So I make an effort not to focus on the issues, but on the practice. Knowing full well that, yes, you're definitely confronted with different things different than I am. I was in the military. Any questions? Last question? Okay, if there's no last questions, then it's time to bring this evening to a close. I want to do this in a way with, can you imagine? I sat in the chair the whole time. That's impressive for me. Kenshin always likes it when I sit in the chair. She says it brings a different quality to the presentation. And it's difficult for me because I am so passionate about these, about Zen practice, about Buddhist practice, about all that it is given to me, and what it and the support that it can provide to others. I'm very passionate about it, and it's interesting because there's this notion that monks are supposed to be so demure. That's the persona. I mean, some may be like that, but just because I act in a demure way doesn't mean that what's going on inside me is demure. So I don't hide it. To be fully present with the reality of who I am is the point. So I'm out of the chair. And in the tradition in which I'm ordained, we bow. It's a beautiful practice. Aesthetically, it's beautiful, and it's also really, it's very nurturing for me. I also find it an incredibly intimate experience. That it's taught in a very precise way. So we're taught to press our palms together with our thumb tips touching. And then we place our tips of our thumbs on the first knuckle. And then the tip of our longest finger, our fingers are together, not spread, but together. And the tip of our longest finger is parallel with the tip of our nose. I remember when I was first taught, I said, well, how do I know it's at the tip of my nose? And they said, well, you can just look over the end of your nose. That I couldn't do it because I kept getting cross-eyed, dizzy. So I checked. It's not to be too stiff, but I see some people, or too relaxed, casual, because there's this kind of stuff. But it's precise. And when we bow at the waist, nothing else moves. And we don't lose contact with who or what we are bowing to. The name of the position in Japanese is Gassho, G-A-S-S-H-O. When I sign my letters, I use a computer to write letters. I don't use the mail, I send them as email. I always sign in Gassho. And some people will write back, well, what's that? And then I get a chance, do not be stingy in the bestowal of the teachings, one of the precepts. So in Gassho, I bow to Kenshin. In gratitude for the support that she provides to me in all the things that I do. Without her help, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to function at the level at which I function. But I think that one of the most, probably the singular most important and intimate relationship I've ever had with another human being has been with Kenshin. She's not my concubine. She's not a sexual partner. But yet, it's through this relation that I have learned so much about my own person. Kenshin, a year ago, Kenshin fell very critically ill. This month is the first time that she's really, really been able to step out and sort of check how her recovery process is going. In the first week of her illness, it wasn't sure whether she was going to make it. And it was I remember the first night, because we travel, we're out on the road, we're helpless in some respects. We're at the mercy of the communities that host us. I remember the first night. I remember that I felt that this experience triggered off in me a series of memories that were war-related, because it felt like I was under attack. That one of the people in my crew was seriously wounded, and if I didn't get them the help that they needed, if I didn't get them to the hospital, to the evac hospital, they were going to die. It was incredible to me, the power of that experience. But it's because of this practice that I was able to just do the next thing. And because of Kenshin's practice and her commitment to practice, she's sitting here today. It's a very powerful thing. It's not what we believe or what we think, but what we do. That's the point. It's what we do. So when I contemplated, when I was faced with the fact that she might not make it, I can't describe to you the emotions that I felt and the thoughts and ideas that I had. And the only thing that I could continue to do was be the best support that I could be for her, because I was confronted again with that powerlessness that I was confronted with on a daily basis when I was in contact. She's an incredible support to me, an incredible support to all of you, because it's her song of the bell that holds us. It holds this. It creates the frame that holds us while we're together in these evenings. To Steve Papala, to Kathleen Garza, I keep calling her Professor Garza's forward in front of the students, for taking the risk to invite me down here and give me the opportunity to meet all of you. I bow to both of you in gratitude. Steve is providing us with a place to stay. I just discovered that tomorrow he's leaving for Cincinnati, and he's leaving us alone in his house. And I went, it's just like, there was a time when you wouldn't do that. But that's a testament to what's possible through this steady commitment to discipline practice. But mostly to all of you, Buddhas to be, I bow to you in gratitude. Understanding that Buddha is not an icon that we worship, it's not a god. The Buddha is simply a word which means awake or enlightened. My robes are a symbol of my commitment to serve Buddha, which means commitment to serve you. To be of service to you, to your enlightened nature. So if there's anything that I can do to help you on your path, do not hesitate to ask me, or hesitate and ask me anyway. Please hold your seats. Give Kenshin a few moments of your time. I think there. Oops. Maybe you'll have a triple espresso and a barbecue.
So there is the opportunity to get a copy of Claude AnShin's book, Marymount, providing books outside. If you like the copy signed, just stay around a little bit. Claude AnShin will sit down with you and sign a copy for you. There's some information materials out there, the typical thing you do when you have a foundation. So there's a flyer that describes the work that we do. There is a sign-up sheet if you want to leave contact information. There is a sticker that just says breathe, which is one of our most important tools that we have available. There is the flyer for the upcoming Veterans Retreat. So just take a moment afterwards to have a look at it and see if any of this material can support you or someone else. I do want to thank everyone for coming tonight, especially the veterans. It's always difficult to bring veterans together, no matter veterans of whatever war. It's a very jaded community, so I'm glad for those who were willing and able to come tonight. Yes, this will conclude our stay here. There is a website and also Facebook page for the Zalta Foundation. If you want to see what else is happening, it's always very much changing because Claude AnShin and also Zalta Foundation do their work only on invitation basis, and that changes every year. So there are some places that we do go back every year, but mostly it is going wherever invitations come from. And so it's always a bit of a puzzle. You can check the schedule that is online. You can also, send an email if you're interested in something particular, and someone will respond to you. I think that's all for now. Again, thank you for coming, and then who knows where our paths might cross again. Thank you. Yeah, I know, the clapping.